There's something I'd like to talk to you about, something that has come to be, it looks like, very important in American public discourse in the last week or so with the dispatch to Los Angeles of U.S. Marines and National Guard to help ICE make mass arrests of recent immigrants and to help the Los Angeles police put down the public protest against ICE's activities. The issue is the difficult relationship between police action and military action. What police people do and what combat troops do looks the same. Sometimes they carry weapons around and shoot them and use physical force, but what they do is not the same. And when they get muddled together as if they're sort of partly one and partly the other, that can be very dangerous. That's what I'd like to talk about. Now, how am I qualified to talk on this subject? Since you don't know me, I'll give an unabashed self-introduction. One, I was in the Marines. I was an officer, and while I was in my 3 years of active duty, among other things that I did was I got military law training and served for some time as the legal officer of the battalion that I was in at Camp Pendleton, at the Marine Corps base in Camp Pendleton. So I do know a little bit about military law. After I left the Marines, I got myself a higher degree in political philosophy from UC Berkeley, and I have taught political philosophy in the US, in Japan, in Okinawa, and in the Philippines. And number three, last year, I published a book called War is Hell, Studies in the Right of Legitimate Violence. That's sort of what this discussion now about the Marines and the Los Angeles Police and the National Guard in LA, what that's about. What all those three organizations plus ICE, I guess, what they share is what's known in political science as the right of legitimate violence, the right to use violence against people under various circumstances without being arrested for doing it, so long as you follow the rules. So I have some things to say on the question of the difference between these three activities. A number of spokespeople for the government just in the last couple of days defended the dispatch of these military organizations to do police work in Los Angeles by saying, okay, we got rid of a couple of bad guys. So what's wrong with that? We got rid of some bad guys that we knew were bad guys. So what's wrong with that? Well, the first thing wrong with it is that the expression bad guys is not a legal term. This is not legal language. It doesn't tell you anything about the law. Bad guys is a term very useful in writing reviews of Hollywood B movies, where there's always, or very often, some people correctly designated as bad guys. But you can't use it as a term of law. And there's a very good reason for that. This may come as a surprise to some of you, but as a matter of fact, it is not against the law to be bad. There is no law that says if you are bad, you have to pay so much in fines. If convicted of being bad, you have to pay this much in fines or spend this much time in jail. If you want to get somebody arrested, convicted of a crime, you have to be able to show that that person has done something, has taken an act that is prohibited in the criminal law, either of the state or of the federal or whatever. There's got to be some law that says this is forbidden. You should not rob a bank. You should not take money out of a bank by waving a gun around. If you did that, you can be convicted of bank robbery and be thrown in jail. But just being a bad guy, you can do all sorts of bad things, break promises, say nasty things about people, and help to ruin their lives or whatever. But that's not against the law. You've got to do something that is specifically against the law. So saying that we got rid of some bad guys is a very dubious thing, very improper for a government representative to say. To get somebody arrested, as I say, this is police work. It requires police investigators to, first of all, that's why they're called investigators, because their job is to investigate whether this accused person, in fact, did do something that is contrary to the law. And if so, and if it's proved, a person in that situation can be sentenced to punishment of fines or imprisonment. And incidentally, if it turns out that other than doing that one illegal thing, this person is a very good person, and a lot of people come in and say, gee whiz, this is this nice guy or this wonderful woman. That won't necessarily get you off. It might mitigate the sentence, but whether you did the crime and whether you're a nice person are separate questions. And repeating, being a bad guy is not punishable under the law. People are pointing out, a number of people who are critical of this use of Marines to do police work, people are pointing out that the training of police workers, policemen, police training, and the training in basic in base camp and basic school of training for combat soldiers is very, very different, absolutely different. Both have to do with the use of the state's right of legitimate violence in certain circumstances, but the circumstances that they're designed for are quite different. Put simply, criminal suspects, if they're convicted of being criminals, are punished for what they do. They have to do something that's punishable, and then they can be punished. And if they haven't done something, again, contrary to the law, then they can't be arrested, or they can't be convicted anyway. On the other hand, in the case of military action, in the case of war, enemy soldiers are killable, proper objects of gunfire or whatever you got that kills people. They're killable because of what they are, not for anything that they do. When you are shooting an enemy soldier on the other side of the field over there, you don't have to investigate what that soldier did, whether that soldier shot at one of us, maybe even killed one of us, or whether he just got there and hasn't been there more than 10 minutes from basic training. If he's got the uniform on, it's okay to shoot that person down. They are killable, proper objects of violence, state violence, good, proper places to aim your rifle, no matter what they did. They might be the sweetest person in the world, or they might be the nastiest, or they might be somewhere in between, like most people. But as long as they have that uniform on, they're killable. So it's the one people, to repeat the contrast, in law enforcement, people can be punished for things that they do. In the case of military action, once the person puts on the uniform of the enemy army, then no matter what they do, it's okay to shoot them down. The right of belligerency being the right of the representatives of the state to kill somebody without being arrested for murder. You will not be arrested for murder if you kill an enemy combat. Now, that's just the basic right of the soldier. There's more. That is, since the invention of things like the machine gun, automatic weapons, rockets, and especially airplanes that can carry out bombings, has become legaler and legaler to kill civilians who just happen to be living in the town or the city that you're bombing, or happen to be somewhere nearby the military units that you're attacking. Okay, that's about the way war looked from the standpoint of the U.S. from World War II to the time that George W. Bush declared a war on terror, declared a war on terror 2 days after uh, the terrorist attack of 9/11. And with that, uh, the way war looked to the United States slightly changed, and it's important to know how. First of all, what's important to understand is that a war on terror is not possible. Why? Because terror is a tactic, and you can't make war against a tactic. You can't make a war against pincers movements or area bombing, or it'd be nice if you could abolish some of these things. But terror is a tactic used by states and used by the enemies of states. It is one particular way of troubling the enemy. What it amounts to is killing people randomly. If you kill people randomly, you don't have to kill so many. It's useful for guerrilla fighters. By killing randomly, people on the other side have no way of knowing who will be next. It could be me, it could be the person next door, it could be anybody. If you say we'll kill just soldiers but not, say, hospital people, then if you're a hospital person, you're relatively safe. But if you kill anybody that happens to be around, then everybody is terrified. That's why it's called a terrorist tactic. Incidentally, the first entity to be called to use terror consciously as a strategy was the revolutionary state of France at the time of the French Revolution, the reign of terror, terreur, as they called it, where who went to the guillotine next was impossible to know day by day. And that's why it terrified everybody. It was called that pretty much through the first part of World War II. For example, the area bombing of Germany by the Royal Air Force was called terror bombing by Winston Churchill. That was not his criticism or appeal to stop doing it. It was just his accurate definition. The kind of bombing they were doing was random. They did not have the power to accurately target certain places and avoid targeting others. They dropped wherever they could drop, and they invented the firestorm, and it was correctly called terror bombing. But the U.S. Redefined terrorism after that, and the new definition was that terrorists are people who use violence against the U.S., and in particular, especially people who are not necessarily connected with the state. They could be liberation groups, independence movements, or have other purposes. But anyway, with this move, terrorism came to be something that, by definition, the U.S. military would never use. if the U.S. uses violence this way, that way, or the other way, since it's the U.S., it's not terrorism. And if it's used against the U.S., it's terrorism. So by doing this and starting to arrest people as terrorists, they, I wouldn't say created a new category of military actor, but rather reinvigorated an ancient one. There is a legal category which is identified in the Latin language, if I can pronounce it badly, as hostis humani generis, which means enemy of all humanity, enemy of everybody. And it's quite ancient. It's known at the beginning of Western law itself. That is, it used to be, originally it was part of maritime law, law of the sea, because it applied, first of all, to pirates, pirates who belong to no country, who may go from island to island and stay away from countries. And therefore, since pirates had no rights at all, that was the characteristic of it. Since they're enemies of everybody, they have no rights at all, even to live. Anybody can arrest them. Anybody can imprison them. And then, and also slave traders, who should be designated hostis humani generis. It was argued about should it be just pirates or pirates and bandits on the land, a highwayman. There were a number of people that were candidates for that categorization. Anyway, by giving combatants that definition of terrorist, the U.S. intended to put them in that category, a category of people with no rights at all. And it was with that in mind, it was that, as part of that project that they began to build, they did build the military prison at the U.S. base in Guantanamo Bay, because no law applies there. At least that's what they hoped. As you know, Guantanamo Bay base is located in Cuba, but since it's U.S. turf owned by contract to the U.S., Cuban law does not apply there. You can't appeal to Cuban law if you're in that base. International law does not apply there. The U.S. was very careful to say that these prisoners are not going to be treated as prisoners of war, which is the rights they would have under the Geneva Conventions in international law. But since they're terrorists and not soldiers of some country, they have no POW rights. The prisoners' countries, various countries' law would not apply there. And then military law doesn't, military law applies there to the military, to the Marines or the U.S. military people who were there, Navy people. But since the prisoners are not members of the U.S. military, they can't appeal to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is a tablet of U.S. military law, and American criminal law. They hoped, they meaning U.S. authorities, hoped and assumed would also not apply to them, so that by imprisoning people in Guantanamo Bay, they were putting them in a place where they had no appeal to any law whatsoever. Law is absolutely supposed to be silent. And to understand what that amounts to, think of this conversation between a prisoner at Guantanamo Bay and his guard. Prisoner, why am I being detained here? Guard, because you are a terrorist. Prisoner, by what judicial procedure and on the basis of what evidence was it determined that I am a terrorist? Guard, in your case, no such procedure and no such evidence is necessary. Prisoner, why is that? Guard, because you are a terrorist. QED. Well, so the terrorist is not imprisoned for something that he did. It is not necessary to show that he actually committed any crime. He is imprisoned for what he is. He is a terrorist. And there's no need to prove that he's actually carried out any terrorist acts. But in any case, he is a terrorist, and that's all that's necessary. So it's like warfare, where you can kill the enemy no matter what the enemy did or did not do, just for what he is. This is where warfare and law enforcement get muddled together and turn out to be something worse than either one. Well, as many of you may know, some U.S. judges and some U.S. lawyers did not agree with that and have been fighting a long battle to restore some rights, even to Guantanamo Bay, and have had some successes. This is not the place. I'm not an expert on this. It's terribly complex, but some prisoners have been released. We hear from the news that there may be not many left. And there was even a few years ago some talk of shutting down the Guantanamo prison. But now, with the new Trump administration, we hear different rumors of voices advocating that we restore the Guantanamo prison, build more prison cells, and prepare it as a place where immigrants can be incarcerated. The problem is that the word terrorist just doesn't fit very well with the great majority of the immigrants being arrested. It's hard to label a terrorist, label as a terrorist somebody who's picking vegetables in the fields or cooking in a restaurant or working in a factory or working in taking care of older people. It's just hard to, it's just not very persuasive to say that what they're doing is an act of terrorism. So the Trump administration needs to find a new category for hostus humani generis, the person with no rights whatsoever, people who can be arrested simply for what they are. In popular language, bad guys works okay. If you're just having a conversation with your friends, you can say, well, they're bad guys. To hell with them. Who wants to help out bad guys? And I think it's even possible to give an accurate definition of what bad guys means in American English. I would define it as people to whom Clint Eastwood can justifiably say, make my day. That is, somebody who's so bad that a police officer or whoever has a gun, it might not even be a on-duty police officer, could blow the person's head off just because he knows how bad that person is. That's one of the routines that are repeated again and again in American movies. But bad guy lacks legal clout. It doesn't ring like a term of law. It's just a little bit too slangy and vague. So what to do? Well, one thing that they're trying is to use the word invasion. Invasion, it's an invasion of immigrants. Invasion is an ambiguous term. It sounds, originally, it means a military matter, crossing a border by using military force and shooting the people who try and stop you. Well, nobody's doing that. We have no recorded cases of anybody crossing our southern border in modern times, protected by artillery fire and mortar fire and carrying machine guns and automatic weapons and shooting down the border patrol that try and stop them. That just hadn't happened, and nobody expects it to happen. But without that, then invasion completely changes its meaning. It just means there's a whole lot of them, like an invasion of tourists, which may be very irritating and annoying, and you wish there weren't so many, but it's not a crime for too many tourists to gather in one place. Well, another term that they dare to use once in a while is unlawful enemy combatants. Now, that's when they want to use an expression that sounds a little bit more technically accurate and legalistic than simply the word terrorist. Terrorist is not exactly a legal crime. It's a category of, it's a strategy, as I said. And unlawful enemy combatant sounds a little bit more like it might have some legal clout. But if you want to call somebody an unlawful combatant, do you need to show cases where that person has participated in unlawful combat? Or is it enough just to label them that and then arrest them for bearing that label that you gave them? Is that enough to justify an arrest? I'll leave you with that question. And I want to say also, as an ex-Marine, people are saying about the Marines, they don't know anything about law enforcement. They don't have any training in law enforcement. That's partly true, but it's not quite accurate, you know. The Marines have military law, like the other U.S. Services. Are covered by military law, which is slightly different from criminal law applied to civilians. They have military police who are trained in doing police work, and they run brigs. That is to say, that's what the Marine Corps prison is called, is the brig, a very unhappy place to be according to its reputation. And they have a criminal investigation division, a certain number of people whose job is to investigate crimes occurring within the Marine Corps. They're not trained to go outside the base and enforce laws in the civil society. For that, they will appeal to the local police, or if they're stationed in some foreign country, like so many are, they have to depend on the police of that country. So, but still, yeah, it's natural that if you're going to have a Marine Corps, a military organization, that it will have its own law enforcement unit within it to protect itself from crime within by other Marines. This doesn't mean that that's their mission. Their mission is utterly different. Their mission is to make war against or defend against, if you'd rather put it that way, foreign enemies. And certainly for many of them, I'm hearing now on the news that for many of the Marines being sent into places like Los Angeles, or many of those Marines, or many Marines who are retired from the Marine Corps, like I am, feel very uncomfortable, very disturbed by the image of using military power against our own citizens or against people in the U.S. who came to the U.S. expecting U.S. justice. Now, that is certain, that is for most Marines not what they expected to get into when they signed up for the Marine Corps. Now, it's true that they're trained to obey orders and they're supposed to do what they're told. And if they're told to go into LA, it's expected that they do. But another thing that people are pointing out, especially ex-Marines, is that Marines especially have another duty that's very, very familiar to them. And the, how should I put it, the climax of their anthem that we used to sing at every gathering, that is the duty to keep their honor clean. If you're a Marine or you know anybody who is, think about that. keep your honor clean. Okay. I hope to make a few more of these little talks about the nature of war. And I'll talk to you again. Thanks for listening to the end here.